Hello, this is Digital Accessibility, the people behind the progress. I'm Joe Walensky, the creator and host of this series. And as an accessibility professional myself, I find it very interesting as to how others have found their way into this profession. So let's meet one of those people right now and hear about their journey. Well, you've been working in the accessibility space for a long time, and you're involved in a lot of different activities beyond the one that you just talked about. But one of the things I like to do is use this as an opportunity to let other people see that there are a lot of different pathways into accessibility as a profession. So how did it start with you? What was the first part of either your live life or work life where you first heard about accessibility?
The first time was probably Dive into Mark, which was a blog that the young folks probably haven't heard of, but the early days of the internet, he did these really cool blog posts about building the World Wide Web. And he had one about accessibility, and I think that was the first that I ever heard of it. Then what really blew me away is Victor Tsaran, who now works at Google, did a really cool screen reader demo where he was showing what it was like to see the homepage of Yahoo. And I was completely blown away and realized, I've been on the bleeding edge of tech for a long time, and I'd never seen this. I never heard of a screen reader. And I was like, okay, I'm not testing for this. If I'm not testing for this, no other developer is really looking at it for the most part. And it really stuck in my head for about 7 years. And then my dad started, as he was getting older, his eyesight and his hearing got worse, and he started to need accessibility features himself. And that's what really prompted me to say, oh, wow, this is something that really, I sort of viewed it as a civil right, and something that if you can't bank independently, right, then how can you live independently? And so I wrote a blog post that turned into Global Accessibility Awareness Day that went viral to my absolute shock. And that's why we're talking today. So that was really my path in. And once you start with accessibility, once you become friends with Jennison, let alone a co-founder of something like GAAD, there's no turning back.
Well, we definitely want to talk more about GAAD. Where you started from. Sounded like you'd already been involved as a developer for a while. So, was that your main role? Was that what your foundational education and early work experience in?
It's funny with programming, you can learn how to program, or as I like to say, for me, it was in the blood. I started at 13, I got an Apple IIe, and finding books for me was really hard back then. It was just looking at a black screen in front of you and a little cursor. And then you might have some friends at school, but within a month of getting that, I wrote like a little sort of Hebrew word processor type program where you type the letter A, the letter Aleph comes out, and just iterated on that. So I took to it very naturally at a young age. And from there, I actually am also very much an entrepreneur. So I started a business in Europe, but I was using CompuServe at the time, came back, and my cousin was working for doing some work with a search engine. And he said, the World Wide Web, this is in the 90s, he said, the World Wide Web is going to really explode. Why don't you handle the business? I'll handle the tech. and I wound up learning the tech very quickly because, like I said, since I was 13, I took to it pretty naturally. And then, yeah, I mean, being part of a search engine in the 90s, you're really steeped in it. Sorry, I'm rambling a little bit, but hopefully that gives you a sense of some of the crazy path that I've taken.
Yeah, no, that's good information. You know, a lot of people come into accessibility from kind of the technology or the programming area where, you know, that's, you know, a place where obviously a lot of our accessibility solutions need to be enabled. So yeah, it's good to uh, see that bit of your background. When you were first doing that, like what were the areas that you went to get more information for yourself about accessibility? We have so much great information now, but if like I go back kind of 25 years ago when I was first starting, it was a lot harder to find good information about it.
It sure was. I'd say I was pretty ignorant in the beginning. When I wrote that blog post, it really was, yeah, I was ignorant, but I had just started my own company, and I had stopped really coding. But then I was pointed to DQ University, and I think for a developer, that one is really, really a good one to fully understand the entire landscape beginning to end. I read, even, you know, running my own company with no time, I made sure every day I did one page. It took me 8 months, but I read every single page of that tutorial, and that really made a huge difference for me.
Well, so then, you know, as you know, started to become more familiar with it, where was the pivot where it started being something, you know, that you were much more involved with? And by the way, if this is where, you know, kind of GAAD comes in, feel free to slot that in wherever, you know, makes sense so that people are aware of that as well.
Yeah, it really was GAD that sort of forced me to really learn it, because everybody assumed that I knew what I was talking about when all I had done was written a blog post. So in the beginning, I wouldn't say that I really knew what I was talking about. I was certainly trying. I always read lots of different blog posts. And one thing I'll add that I think might be educational for the audience is what made GAD really was community. So both Jennison and I were involved in community. I had started about 7 different technical meetups. And every single time I would read a blog post by somebody great, somebody that I didn't care if they were well-known or not well-known, but if they taught me something, I would just send them an email and say, you know, I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I said, I know you're going to be in the Bay Area sooner or later. When you come, take an extra hour trip, come to LA, and make more out of your California trip and speak to our group. And so I got to meet the core developers of many different technologies. And then I had somebody to call up on pretty much anything. It was really something that changed my whole career. And let Jennison and I, by being a part of the community, we had folks to reach out to really turn this into something a little bit more.
Well, I've been fortunate to have Jennison on this program in the past, and he's talked about GAAD. But what for people that may be just hearing about it for the first time, you know, why don't you define it and just kind of describe it? And of course, in the show notes, you know, we'll have links to it. But just, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, what it is and how it works.
Sure. So I wrote this blog post about 12 years ago saying that I felt myself as a developer, I did not know enough about accessibility. And I knew that we weren't doing a good job as developers. And I felt the reason for it was that we were ignorant about it completely. And so the idea was, let's create a day of awareness so that developers and designers and product people, anybody that involved in building a digital product, can learn about accessibility. And we proposed things like, don't just use your keyboard rather than the mouse in order to navigate your website, reach out to journalists, especially tech journalists, so that they could become aware of the day. And let's hope that this grows and that we build that awareness. And that just took off to the tune of a 200 million Twitter reach, 200 million users every year. And Apple, Microsoft, IBM, Yahoo changed their homepage for the day. You know, it just, and products were released on the day. So it really kind of took off. And a couple of years ago, we started the GAAD Foundation. So that's also another thing that I'm very involved in, where we're trying to do more than make it just one day. We're trying to have it have a lasting impact. And one of the big things that I worked on through the GAAD Foundation is a GAAD pledge, where different open source projects take the pledge to make their project accessible. And that's something where if you have a framework that people are using, you can impact a lot more people.
Those numbers you mentioned are really staggeringly high, so that's extremely impressive. I've participated myself as as somebody just consuming all the great content that's out there. By the way, the way it's set up is that this community that you mentioned is just responsible for individuals and organizations, both corporate and private, to kind of just put together activities that are virtually available or could be physically available throughout the world. And then there's a website that tries to corral the information about that. But it's just a way to both get tons of great information, but also just realize the global participation that there is in accessibility.
Absolutely. And the websites for that are accessibility.day and then the GAAD.foundation. So the foundation is where we talk about our activities, and then accessibility.day is where we talk about the activities during the day of GAAD.
Well, so as I mentioned, that information will be in the show notes. But now coming back to you and your activities, are there any other things that you're working on that you'd want to bring us up to date about, or things coming up in the future?
Absolutely. Everybody's talking about AI right now. And as I said, I've always been working on the bleeding edge of technology. And AI is obviously something that has reached its point in the community, and not just the accessibility community, but just in general, the tech scene. And I've just been fascinated by it, and particularly around accessibility, because what people somehow don't look at is the fact that almost every aspect of AI is related to accessibility, because you're trying to do a visual recognition, you're trying to understand a video scene, you're trying to understand the spoken word, you're trying to translate into different languages, you're trying to emulate human senses and human behavior and human physical touch. All of these different aspects are things that are going to be really helpful for accessibility. And I don't know that the community has quite caught up to how much it's going to impact us, but I'm really excited about it. And that's the reason that I launched a podcast, Joe Dev on AI. So I'm going back to my developer roots and kind of cutting that name off in order to say Joe Dev on AI. So that's the name of the podcast. And although I'm also talking about AI on its own, a big piece of the podcast is about AI and accessibility.
Well, I'm going to be really interested in that. I don't do a lot of bleeding edge work, but I do try to keep up on things. So thinking about what it means for accessibility, with virtual reality and AR and so on. And so I think your AI discussion is going to be one that I haven't given thought to yet. So I'll look forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, it's really exciting, and I think within a year, I hope to see lots of new products and lots of solutions that we've been missing. Because the one thing that we keep seeing is that Web A1,000,000 report every year that shows what percentage of the websites are inaccessible, and seeing a different approach is very welcome.
And so just right there, you mentioned, one of the kind of persistent issues that's with us is, we feel like we feel like we're doing a lot of great work, but then at other times I kind of look around and I'm like, geez, I thought we could have been a lot farther along and more saturated with accessibility in digital products by now. But let me just open it up to you. Are there any particular areas that you see that the profession should be spending more time, or things that we should be aware of as accessibility professionals?
Yeah, well, why don't we dive into AI a little bit? Um, there's great tools out there that will do automated speech recognition, but they're not quite, that last 10% is the hardest part, where you can get an entire transcript, but it won't necessarily be good at diarization, which means splitting out who is saying what. That kind of thing. It's just that last mile is hard to close the gap. So that's something that it would be great to build on top of existing tools. And a lot of people are feeling that automated tools are not there or will never be there. And I don't think that's true. I think that AI is going to be better at doing captions than humans in terms of recognizing what's being said. I think it's starting to get to the point that the error rate is going very low. And I think we should focus on that. And another big one, I think, is going to be the interface design is going to change. I think there's going to be a lot more of this chatbot style interface where you'll have an AI that's going to look at a website or a mobile app and allow you to interact with that. So here we are, we're trying to understand the code that's underneath the page, but if you have an AI look at the page, interact with the page, and understand what all the features are, maybe the screen reader looks completely different in the future. And I've played with the Be My Eyes, the new app that they did together with OpenAI, and that was fascinating because it was able to look at a web page. It took a picture from my mobile phone, looked at a web page, and described the page. And you could ask it to read out the page. You could ask it to sort of query the page. It's a totally different interface. And so I think we should put a little bit of effort into reimagining what does assistive technology look like in the age of AI.
And with respect to AI, it seems like it's just captured a huge part of the tech news cycles over the past 3 months. Yeah, it's not always clear, what exactly drives that. I think just people are generally interested in new technologies that seem like they're transforming things. How do you have any ideas about how you see it becoming, available to practitioners to be able to work with? I mean, I've tried out demos and things like that, but is it going to come from tool vendors that we're familiar with, or are there going to be sort of platforms, open platforms? Do you have any thoughts about that?
That is the $1,000,000 question. I think this very podcast, you wait a month and then everything we say changes. So to make really bold predictions is a fool's errand, but we can speculate. I don't know where it's going to come to, but for me, what really captured my attention was the fact that Google invented this technology with the transformers, and they couldn't come up with a product because the hallucinations and the negatives were too big of a risk. So you can't blame them for not productizing this. But within a period of a couple of months, they got challenged to the tune that they lost, what was it, almost $1 billion in market cap very quickly. And they're in danger of disruption from an invention that they created. They're an AI first company since 2016. So it's not like they were asleep at the wheel. They were not willing to innovate. And the place that disruption happens is when you take a powerful technology and you put it in the hands of the masses. So the tools I'm excited about are the ones that are allowing people to code that are only speaking, for example, that don't have access to really do a lot of keyboard work, that might have certain mobility issues. Those are the kind of places where, wow, you're now unlocking amazing brains who can look at the problems that they may face themselves and solve them, because that's where the best products are, when you solve your own problems, but also solving problems for the world. You're just opening up an incredible avenue by making the technology cheaper. And the best developers are now using tools like Copilot and Tab9 to write code in languages that they would be scared to have touched before. They're feeling empowered. And then you have people that are not even coders coding. For example, Yohei Nakajima wrote this baby AGI repo or code that went viral on GitHub, and he calls himself a non-coder. He uses no coding tools, and he goes viral on the coding social platform of GitHub, right? So when you see that, that's when you're like, okay, this is a big deal. It's not just a hype cycle. This is already having a big impact and bringing technology to the masses. So to me, that's super exciting. It has its downsides too. It has its scary side. So I'm not one of those that's hyping it without looking at the other side.
Well, you've given me a lot to think about in this one area, so I'm looking forward to learning about it from your the new work that you're doing. Also looking forward every year to GAAD, and we'll make sure we have that information here in the program notes. But Joe, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today, and hopefully we can meet up at a physical accessibility event sometime in the future.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right, thanks a lot.
Okay.